Well, it has been an interesting week, and there's only one person really who can explain it to us in the way that Jeff Lutz can explain it to us. So, Jeff, we're not going to, bury the lead, so to speak. We're not going to, go ring around the rosy on this one. We're going to go right down into the gut of the problem. Guggenheim's Ron Jusicow, I guess is how you pronounce his name. He says, look, I have said repeatedly this week, the entire story for quarter one was the Model Y. He said that Tesla no longer sees price cuts as a demand driver, so they're switching to advertising. I think that's correct. It obviously remains to be seen how the ad impacts sales, but it could be huge if done well. The other answer is to get the half Juniper. I'm saying this. The other half is to get the half Juniper out to the market ASAP. It has all the greatest tech, all the greatest stuff. But we had a miss. The miss wasn't on the production side. The miss was on the sales side. Am I missing something here?
It's a mixture. So, thanks, Randy. I think you teed it up well. What happens in a quarter, and people just need to be patient and listen, because when I look at the number and I look at 387K, it's a miss. There's execution issues, there's supply issues, there's demand issues. If you'd like to hear about what can happen with supply and how it can cause stranded inventory, how it can cause missed shipments, I'll explain that. If you don't care to listen, you can move on. So in terms of what happens in a quarter, Tesla builds various vehicles at various points in time in the quarter to reach various points of distribution. Okay, they can't build certain vehicles at certain times in Shanghai and reach certain points of distribution in Europe. There's timing involved with everything. So what happened in the quarter? A lot of things happened in the quarter. But if you just start with the happenings in Berlin, you had the Red Sea issues, which quite frankly was disrupting ship routes, and it could have impacted other things. But let's just stick with Berlin at this point because they actually shut down.
Right.
And so you have a factory that's at somewhere between a 5,000 to 6,500 a week run rate. We know that they reached that 6K run rate at some point, and you take it down. So when you take something down that's been tuned up to that rate, and you take it down for a period of days, I don't know the exact number of days, it was north of 10 days, and then you spool it up. You do not spool it up, and you're not, this, Randy, from running a factory. When day one, you're not at 100% capacity. You have to ramp back up to that. And then what happens too is when did this happen in the calendar? This was I think the first 10 days or so of February. And so there were certain builds at certain points in time that were in the build plan for Berlin. Remember, this is still a build to order company. They're not building widgets. They are building product to inventory, but they're still primarily a build to order company. And so there was a schedule of what was supposed to be built during those dates that obviously had to be shifted. And then once they shifted that inbound supply route and they restarted it back up, that inbound supply also had to ramp up. So then it ramps up and then it's in. So now you've rerouted, you've plugged in, and now you've got supply flowing again inbound to the factory. Great.
And I can remember. I absolutely remember in the old days, we had a big old whiteboard. Well, I guess it was a chalkboard on the wall where we were putting out, these are the guys that need their parts,
Right.
Well, all of a sudden you're shut down for 10 days. Those 10 days worth of guys didn't get their parts. And now when you're ramping back up again, well, does that mean this guy is more important because he's going to got to be put in a ship versus this guy is right down the street and he's going to be able to walk in and
You're talking about a reallocation exercise. So once you have a supply disruption, you go into reallocation mode of all right, who can get their stuff? And if we start building on February 10th or 11th, and when something exits the factory on the 13th, what are the furthest points of distribution that I can reach and still recognize revenue for the quarter and get in this case for Tesla, a made delivery.
Right. And
so that's what happens. So you lose that period of time. And then when you restart, you're not at 100% capacity. And quite frankly, you have some in-quarter perishable demand of there was stuff that was scheduled to be built that day that may not reach their furthest point of distribution in time. That analysis needs to be done. Tesla knows the answers to these questions. I'm just telling you how this works in real life. The second thing in Berlin, and again, this is not the entire reason that Tesla wasn't at 420 or 440. These are part of the reasons. We can tag numbers. I would tag 10 to 20K on these issues here alone. And then on the fire in Berlin, that happened at a very weird time. That was in the first, I think, week of March. And what happens in a quarter? You have a 90-day quarter, and this like basically Tesla's on its like 75-day production calendar. It's not an exact science, but basically everything built after that 75th day has a declining likelihood of ever reaching a final point of distribution to recognize revenue and recognize the delivery. So when you have a problem in the first part of March and then you come up, you're down, and then you come back up and call it the second part, or call it the second week, and then you're not at full capacity again. You have to re-ramp up to that. Again, you've lost time, you've lost capacity. There was a build plan for that week. There were customers that they were going to build for in that week and probably reach local distribution and get to, and they may be, out in the first week of April. We don't know. But these things are disruptive. Okay. They are disruptive, and they also strand inventory, because if those cars didn't make it, by March 30th or 31st, what happens? They show up in Tesla inventory and they're there, and they'll get rid of them in the first couple of weeks of April. But that's how these things work. And there's a number of other things. So we have the Model 3 refresh. This is a new vehicle. They announced it I think January 9th, the second week in the quarter. So what happens? You're in the second week in the quarter. There was no evidence of any builds, any VINs prior.
Right.
And I think Troy was looking at this data and doing a pretty good job. Very few VINs built in January. So they obviously had startup issues. They obviously had either an inbound supply issue of something that just they completely dropped the ball on planning for, or there was some disruption in their supply chain. And so this product is normally slotted for about 55,000 units in the US in a quarter.
Right.
And we don't know the exact number they did. But from a build perspective, what you're trying to do with a new product is you're trying to get it from 0 to its peak run rate as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. And you don't care about the beginning, the middle, or the end of the quarter. But if you have a disruption and you have a problem, and it looks like they started recovering and building more product in March, right, you don't slow down, you don't stop. Whether it's March 30th or March 31st, they have the pedal down and they're building those things. And so therefore they're going to show up in inventory, they're going to miss the shipment window, and then you're going to have stranded supply. So people are like, why are there builds in excess of demand if they had all these supply disruptions? It's the right supply at the right time that needs to be built at various points in the quarter. And quite frankly, they had shutdowns that we just described, right, in the quarter. But each one of these you could prescribe an amount to. We don't know the final number on, I think, Model 3. We'll have to see the registrations for the quarter. I do respect the people that try to count and label production. Mm-hmm. I do not count cars, but I do review their data. I do look, and I do try to apply a supply chain lens. So long answer, but there'll be some number we'll tie to the Model 3. There'll be some number we tie to the Berlin fire terrorist issue. There'll be some number we tie to the Red Sea issue. You can even tie something to the 7,500 rebate, not really starting to the third or fourth week of the quarter. And remember, you have 90 days of shipments. You have 10 or so weeks of production. And, every one of these things was kind of on a partial schedule. You had the Model 3 refresh starting in week 2 or 3 of that 10-week schedule. You had the credits starting later. So all these things have factors. It's not meant to be a set of excuses. It's meant to just understand that there's factors involved. And then Tesla we should really try to understand, like, what were they doing from a pricing perspective? They decided to not go for, this end of quarter pricing. And did they also pull the lever back on not expediting units at the end of the quarter, not doing the final delivery way? Did they pull back on that too? That'll be interesting to hear dialogue from the company. And what we really need to understand from Tesla is, what does this mean going forward? Should we be thinking about for Q2? Mm-hmm. Were these one-off issues, and now your supply chain is, again, if we go back to the Model 3 refresh, if you add, let's say, 40,000 units to the quarter, I'm making that up,
Right.
but let's say it's that number, then you're all the way up in the 420s
Right.
and we're having a different conversation.
Absolutely true. Okay, so by the way, I happen to buy everything you're saying, and in fact, I think that the very morning that the numbers came out on Tuesday morning, I suggested that probably I was my number off the top of my head, just kind of thinking it through, was roughly 25,000, 20,000, 25,000 out of the 47,000 extra, if you will, that went into inventory, technically, was probably all the things that you were just talking about. But that left me with 20 to 25,000
Yeah.
unexplained. So I went around the world and I said, well, yeah, they could have had a few items out of Shanghai that weren't shipped as fast as they might be. They might have been on ships, more on ships than usual. But that becomes one of those things. How do you know until Tesla tells us, which they probably never will. So for me, my analysis, which I've been promoting all week, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'll let you have a chance to give your 2 cents, is that this is all Model Y. And it's the other 20,000 is Model Y, and it's Model Y demand. And it's not Model Y demand problems because EVs are no longer in the, everybody's loving EVs, not loving on EVs as much as they were. It's not because of the competition. It's not because of interest rates. It's not because the $7,500 was late in terms of being figured out how it was going to be applied. It's because Tesla has provided two new competitors to the Model Y, which are way better vehicles than the Model Y in terms of their tech, in terms of how quiet they are, in terms of their new amazing stereo systems, in terms of backseat screens. I mean, just go down the line. Of course, the Cybertruck, Elon has said it's the best truck that Tesla's ever made, and a lot of people have, the best car Tesla's ever made. And a lot of people have echoed that and said, yeah, it's the best car Tesla's ever made. Therefore, probably maybe the best car that's ever been made. So if I'm sitting here between those three cars and I don't have a time problem, I don't have a car that's dying in my front yard or something, I need to get something new. If I'm just, I can take my time and get what I want. I may be opting out for the Cybertruck or for the Model 3 instead of the Model Y, which might have been my choice in November.
Yeah, it's for Tesla, it's a real mess that they allocated those lines for the Model 3 refresh in Fremont and they weren't able to produce product. And you don't have unlimited resources. You build Model Y in that site. And yeah, there may be select consumers that are, between, purchase decisions. That's a little bit out of my expertise. It's not clear to me what the overlap may be between a Cybertruck and a Model Y. I do believe that the Cybertruck is going to transcend the truck category, and there's going to be people that never owned a pickup truck before, like me, like you.
Yes.
I don't know, maybe you have one. I shouldn't
No,
say that, but
neither my wife or I have ever had a truck.
yeah, and we're gonna buy Cybertruck. So, I think you're offering up, a plausible scenario for debate, and people should debate it. I think there could be some truth to this, but I think you tag something to supply disruptions.
Yep.
I think you tag something to, demand, issues, and we'll
Overall.
talk about the other, and it's the other thing people said, don't talk about other car makers. Well, wait a minute. I think it's important to understand what's going on in macro auto, and like,
Yes.
is macro auto down by region or what's happening?
Yeah.
We understand GM and Ford shipped 6 and 7% more. Well, did you look at their inventory? Their inventory is up 50 to 80% from the same quarter you compared them to the prior year. So they're getting credit for shipping their product in the inventory. These are the things that people
dealers.
into dealer inventory, and they're taking, sales credit for that.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things we need to understand, but you kind of have to go back to Tesla and say, look, Tesla should be on this growth trajectory. Now they came off of it this year and they said, look, we're not going to grow at 30, 50% like we normally do. It's going to be some number lower. And you'd like it to be, I think the street had about 15% growth year on year. So this is obviously starting in reverse. So what do you do with it? It's the first quarter. It's usually the worst quarter of the year. Um, you had this Model 3 snafu. So you really need to get back and understand that Tesla knows the order book on the Model 3. That's the other key to this. Tesla knows if they've got, like, as soon as they get this thing spooled up, are they going to have a problem or not? So I found it interesting in their P&D report that they called out supply issues. They did not call out demand issues.
Right.
But then in this Elon tweet from overnight, he kind of said, "Hey, we'll look at BYD. They're down,
Right.
43% quarter on quarter." And he didn't say this, but Tesla's down about 20%
Right.
quarter on quarter. But then year on year, BYD's up, I think, 13%, and Tesla's, I think, negative 9%. So, um, so I think there's still something to look at. I think it's multiple facets. But I think it all comes back to, they have to get these supply disrupt. They have to get the right supply at the right place at the right time. It looks like they're optimizing for COGS, so they're not going for the price reductions. And I think they're not going for the end of quarter delivery wave and expedite. So I think with all these factors, their supply timing's really got to be like perfect. So I think these are the things that, to me, that come to mind right now. I think there could be, like you said, there could be people that are between purchases of, do I want a 3 or a Y? And then there's this Cybertruck thing out there, but you're going to be frozen. You're going to be frozen for a year waiting for a Cybertruck. And there's no guarantee it's going to be at that price point either. So yeah,
Yeah, I'm not thinking, I don't think it's helpful to really look at it with a microscope. I'm saying that this person is not needing a car. The car is running. It's no problem. It's doing fine, but they do want a new Tesla at some point. Either they've got a Tesla and they want a different one, or they have never had a Tesla. They want a Tesla. They've been planning to get a Tesla. And I think that there's an overlap between the buyer, somebody who is a sedan or SUV buyer. I think there's an overlap between those two. Somebody who's an SUV buyer or a truck buyer, I think there's an overlap between those two. And when I talk about that truck buyer, I'm talking about the lifestyle truck buyer, not the construction worker.
Yeah.
So I think there's some overlap between those three. And right now, I'm a tech guy. I mean, I love tech. I try to be the first to have the 80-inch television. I try to be the first to have the latest, greatest Apple, whatever it is. And I think for the tech person, they want the latest tech. And if the Y is now not the latest tech, clearly not the latest tech, I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem. So I'm hoping now, okay, so now let me just say this. I back up and I take the 35,000-foot view, and I come back and I say, Elon Musk, I wrote a book about his 16 characteristics, the Elon Musk method, that he has these 16 things that he is world-class on, that nobody beats him in terms of his skill sets. But one of those is not sales and marketing. He's a great salesman, but not necessarily a great sales manager. He knows about marketing, knows about, all the methodologies there, but he's not a marketer. He has not built sales, what do you call it? Big advertising campaigns and stuff like that in his history. However, he's really smart and he can really dial in on things fast. And if in fact there's 20 or 30 or 40,000 cars that could have been sold in the first quarter, but for lack of demand, he knows this. And he's focused like a laser on it, especially if it looks like it's going to continue. That's kind of where I finally come to. He's going to be moving on that subject matter, because I don't think he's going to be okay with continuing to see this, whether that means getting the Juniper done faster than they intended to, whether that means zero interest rates like they just did in China, whatever that means, he's going to find a way.
Yeah. And correct. And I mean, Tesla can be, it's okay to ask questions and be somewhat critical of, so this marketing campaign that started on social media, now they're on Facebook and YouTube and everywhere, which is where a lot of people are now consuming media. Sure. I think they're on top of that, which is good. But, this started, in earnest, I would say kind of midway through the quarter, I think, when they really started ramping some of this stuff up. So I think you can be a little bit critical of like, when did Tesla realize that there were issues with awareness of their product, the price points? Because you can see all the advertising. It says starting at 36 XXX, and the safest car. And they haven't even gotten to advertising autonomy yet, because that was really finalized near the end of the quarter in terms of the performance of the vehicle. So you can criticize them and say they're a little bit late to this, and there's been an awareness problem for a while. Well, okay, so now they're on top of it, but I think there's still some strange things. This Tesla's a 500 plus billion dollar company. I can't tell you who the head of worldwide sales is for the company.
Can't either.
Maybe it's Tom Zhu. But I mean, he's kind of the head of like
Yeah,
building factories and getting
right.
product built too. So you have a 500 plus billion dollar company, and up to this point, your product was really selling itself.
Yeah,
But maybe what got you to this point versus what's going to get you to a trillion, back to a trillion and trillion five, maybe you do need a different sales effort. I don't know. Maybe you do need a different marketing effort to get the word out. So we see Tesla in the job postings, like they are going after some of these things with marketing, with assets and so forth. So I think they've got to get this spooled up. But I think as investors and longtime investors and followers of the company, like, it should be clear, like, we have a world-class head of marketing, we have a world-class head of sales, and they've got a strategy, and this is what they're doing. So I mean, there are areas to be critical, but at the same time, I don't think any of us would have thought of like how to make a car drive itself, or under $1,200 a car, and how to set this how to So I mean, you can nitpick anything, but it's like, okay, has Tesla realized this, and are they on top of it, and are they going to fix it? And then I think you still have to go back to the inventory side, and like the way they manage a supply chain, the way they manage factories and manufacturing is absolutely world class.
yes.
And even if they spool up to 26 days or 29 days of inventory, it's fine. I think it's mostly temporary.
Mm.
But I do think that they need to actually spool their inventory up a bit to drive their sales volume up. Because as you know, you can't just be at 1 or 2 weeks of inventory. That's essentially stocked out in most
Right,
locations, because
right.
there's an in-transit component of that inventory. And this is things I love to like explain to people, because people think like, oh, you got 2 weeks of inventory, like you should be like be able to sell cars for 2 weeks. Well, no, you gotta get that product. You have an available to sell component, and you have an in transit component.
Right.
And I think people need to understand that. And Cern Basher and I were looking at some of the numbers on this, and 2 weeks is a good rule of thumb in terms of transit time. But in some of the Europe, to Shanghai, to Europe, and some of these other routes, I mean, the real average is closer to 19 days
Yeah,
of like across all geographies of getting product from the factory to in someone's hands. So I think carrying the 2 weeks of inventory is too low, especially if half of that is in transit. And there are ways to calculate stock out metrics, and there are calculations for this. And my guess is they got to get their inventory at 3 or 4, between 3 and 4 weeks minimum, to have a healthy, basically, so anybody can walk in to their local Tesla and basically have a decent selection of something they can make a decision on and drive off.
yeah,
There's studies on this that show, like, when they make a decision to want to buy a car, they want to get in and
right,
out of that process in a couple of days or less.
right. Yeah, absolutely true. Well, speaking of all of that, let me take one more shot at your very specific expertise. You have been involved in some S-curve situations in your life,
Yeah.
in particular in flip phones and in smartphones. You've seen these S-curves before. Is it normal to have periods when the S-curve is going like this, and then it kind of flattens for a minute and then picks up again? Is that a normal part of the game?
Yeah. Yeah, it happened. It happened during smartphones. I can look back at some of the data and look back at the specific years. But it happened a couple of times in fact, when the smartphone ramp happened during it started during the great financial crisis. And people don't understand
Yeah,
this.
that's right.
And we were sitting, because we were, kind of the core of Android, and we were working with Google. This is Motorola Google partnership. And we were aware of what other companies were looking at too. And then you had Apple, and there's a big decision around, like, okay, you have a recession. Like, do we invest in this or not? And the answer was resoundingly, yeah, you invest, because there's an overwhelming desire to go from, these basic phones that you can just talk and text with to something that you have this app ecosystem with. And um, it turned out to be the right decision. But during that curve, the first year, 10 million units, and it got to 30 million units. And then we had times where the curve kind of leveled out, maybe a couple 100 million units a year. And then boom, it goes up and it doubles.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of those situations occurred. And now, it's anywhere from 1.2 to 1.4 billion smartphones per year. But that curve, that industry, that 1.2 to 1.4 billion, it started at 5 to 10 million at one point, and even less in the first year. In the first year, like the main smart of each one, they were just building hundreds of thousands and probably didn't get to their first million until after a year. So yes, the answer to your question is there are periods of time where you don't just continuously grow at 30 or 50% every year. It just doesn't happen. There's points where it kind of slows a bit and then it just picks up.
Yeah, and it may not have anything to do with the economy and may not have anything to do with anything other than the second level adopters or the third level adopters are just not ready yet. They haven't been shown, they haven't been proven. They're not desperate enough. They don't have $1,000, whatever
it could be Randy, it could be a dozen different reasons. I remember we were going from 3G smartphones to 4G smartphones. One of some of the RF filters for 4G were not in plentiful supply in that first 6 to 12 months. And so it basically gated the whole industry. So you'll look at, there'll be this little bit of droop off when 4G came out, and then boom, it took off. So that was a technology supply limitation and a planning problem at that point in time. And then there's country expansion. We started with, a set of 20 to 30 countries, which is where EVs are today. And eventually it's at 155 countries.
Right.
So getting to that tick, the global distribution is another portion of that. We've nowhere near unlocked that in EV. And there's an affordability thing there. And there's also an infrastructure thing that they've got to work through. But same thing on the mobile phone side. You had an affordability issue at a different scale.
Yep.
And you have the infrastructure side was the cellular infrastructure side that needed to be put in place.
Yeah. Switching subjects just a tiny bit. We hear today that OpenAI is aggressively poaching engineers from Tesla and having success, according to Elon, by offering crazy compensation. Anything to worry about?
Yeah, this happens in tech a lot. This happened during the smartphone. During the ramp of smartphones, when it was realized like, hey, this thing's gonna be having years of doubling. You need people that can figure out how to build these things, how to do software, and so there was aggressive recruiting and people stealing people and giving them massive pay packages. Well, now you have this with AI occurring, and you're probably going to have it with humanoid robots as well. You're going to have people, so you have this industry poaching that occurs. It's really a problem in California, and it can be a problem globally and in other states too. But you have this poaching occur because kind of all the populations kind of overlap. So like the OpenAI people are on the same kind of bar and lunch scene and social scene as the people working, in Palo Alto for Tesla and Tesla AI and XAI and so forth. So that's what happens. People talk, and then you have these situations occur, and a lot of these people don't stay at one location for more than like 2 to 4 years.
Right.
And there's a number of reasons. It could be their boss. It could be what they're working on. It could be like, hey, I want to just keep getting these, monster pay packages and see what I'm worth. And yeah, so it's not uncommon. So when I see a person, I see a name, I saw it today, it happens. I think it's a little disconcerting of the Tesla and XAI relationship. And what is that? And should Tesla have a stake in XAI? It's the Tesla investors that they help build or the start out of XAI with their investments and so forth. I mean, I think there's a logical discussion there. I think Elon's even admitted that as well.
Yes.
Not admitted, but like saying, hey, maybe there should be an opportunity for Tesla to take, a stake in XAI. So I think Tesla investors should have a stake in XAI, and I think XAI is going to be in Tesla vehicles. I think there's going to be a grok component
Oh yeah.
in Tesla vehicles,
And in the robot.
and of course in the robot, and which is another Tesla product. So to me, there should be some sort of like synergization between these companies.
But more
And
formalized,
yeah,
where
we
there's
got
an
to,
actual, yeah, where there's, yeah, either money.
and finally just on people like this person, this role, maybe he'd reached his kind of his peak point at Tesla AI in terms of the work he needed to do, because now everything's in neural nets. I'm not saying all the work is done and they don't need engineers and it's a panacea, but different engineers are needed for different periods of time. And you needed like Karpathy during that architecture phase.
Yeah.
And his work was probably gold during that period. I'm sure they'd love to have him back today, but there's certain people you need at certain phases of time. It's not, all the same people at all points in time.
Yeah, and to make clear to anybody who hasn't been following this closely on X, is that Elon came out later and said, look, we did keep this guy from going to OpenAI by hiring him at X.ai. But the reason we did that was because the only way that we were going to be able to keep him in the Elon Musk empire was by making that offer. There was nothing we could do to keep him at Tesla. Now, some people, of course, are going to look at that askance and say, "Oh, yeah, it sounds like you're just making an excuse or whatever." But I think that legitimately sounds right, kind of based on what you just said. The real excitement right now is around large language models and where that's going to go and what that really means in terms of AI and AGI. And he may really have been looking not only at the bigger pay package, but also at the opportunities that are on that side of the street. So unless we hear something horrible otherwise in the future, I'm going to give Elon a pass on that one. The explanation makes sense to me. Let's take a look at the economy. Oh no, one more last thing here. Apple is exploring humanoid robots. So now we have almost all of the Mag 7. I think maybe all of the Mag 7 involved in one way or the other in robots and AI and potentially AGI. Will this make the street finally wake up and go, the robots are real and people should be invested? And is maybe that the reason Tesla only went down 6 yesterday and went up today?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a connection to the stock. And
I just mean the overall optionality of all these things that are coming. Yeah.
Yeah. I honestly don't think the street is connected humanoid robots to Tesla yet. I don't think those conversations are happening on a regular basis. You'd have to go to, your channel or Herbert's channel or so. There's really only a couple of points in the internet where there's a regular conversation about like what's happening here with Tesla. It's not coming up on the earnings call. It's not a factor. They have these 6 to 12 month purviews, and that's what they look for. So yeah, I think there is some validation occurring, and I think when you see Jensen on stage with 9 different bot vendors, I personally think only 1 or 2 of them even have a chance of getting off the starting line,
right?
And building something at scale. Remember, that's the hard part, is being able to build something at scale profitably.
Are they
And it's not
calling
just
you?
work.
Are they calling you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's going to be the challenge, but I think the space is definitely validated. It would make sense for people to go after some companies to go after the industrial side, some to go after the home side. It makes sense for them to go after different verticals, but the TAM is going to be gigantic. So it's not like you're going to have the competition's coming thing. I think you're going to be a long way away from saying that.
So do you think Apple will be any better at building a robot than they were at building a 4-wheeled robot?
So yeah, I could do a whole session on what I believe, the capabilities of certain companies are. All I'll say about with humanoid bots, because I do work with a lot of mega cap clients, as I'll say, is that it's in a weird spot. If you're an automobile manufacturer, you're used to bending and working with large pieces of metal and either casting it or doing a robotic arm assembly of it. and you're used to that massive device of product and assembling it, and you've got assembly times, process time, so forth. And then you've got this, and you've got a certain density of product and material and microelectronics relative to the total density of the product. And then you go down to the smartphone level, and you probably got the maximum density per square meter of product. And there's a certain level of expertise of like how to build those microelectronics. And I will tell you this, not a lot of these companies have the kind of expertise that you think that they have, because there were decisions made over the last couple of decades to outsource various components. So there isn't really a Tesla out there that's, by the way, I'm not discounting the engineering knowledge and capability of these companies because they have it in the manufacturing and development side, but there isn't some there in America, there aren't companies that own their own factories and manufacturing footprint and have kind of invested the way Tesla has in manufacturing. I'll leave it at that. So I think Tesla now becomes uniquely positioned because they've built the big product, they've built the smaller product with Starlinks and other products they make, and now you have to build this product that's kind of in the middle. And I think Tesla's approach to building this thing is honestly going to be, it's going to be the next leg in the stool that kind of crushes the competition.
Yeah.
Because I think they're going to get there. They're going to beat them on the AI front. I think they're going to beat them on the actuator front, but then it's going to come down to the supply chain, and it's going to come down to the manufacturing velocity. And I think they have an advantage that people just do not talk enough about, because manufacturing in America is not a sexy topic for whatever reason.
Right.
But it's extremely important. If you look at kind of the I call kind of the four corners of Tesla, you've got auto, you've got humanoid, you've got energy, and to me, it's manufacturing. And these four corners come together, and there's no one company that can match them on those, even in any one of those four boxes, or certainly the four combined.
We need a meme on that. Could you get your
I think I'm gonna
produce?
I'll have to get that made up.
Okay, would you get that made up? So let's switch to the economy. The economy has continued to be super resilient, but it seems to be doing so on the back of consumer and the government. That's it, just the consumer and the government. And those are both tapped out. People are saying that the consumer is using up their savings, using up their cash, starting to use their credit cards too much. And we got the government. We know they're not going to be adding to what they spent last year. They might spend as much, but they're not going to be able to spend more on infrastructure or more on this and that. So recessions happen very, very quickly. And this time it might happen because the engine just runs out of gas. Or can the economy keep going and continue to do this 1 or 2 or 3% thing all the way through the end of the year? What do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely some conflicting information. Obviously, I think on the ISM services, they were expecting a higher number this morning, and it came in, it was over 50, so it's expansionary, but it was low.
Yeah.
And it was much lower than expected. I think they gave the market a little bit of a temporary boost because, quite frankly, a lot of the economic indicators have been coming in hot.
Right.
And you had 14 Fed speakers, I think, over the last couple of days. And it's just been, it was a FOMC, the Open Mouth Committee, they're just talking nonstop. And so you have an economy that's running hot. But there's some weird stuff going on in the statistics. Like, first off, you have JOLTS, which is 2-month-old data. I think we're going to get changers tomorrow on that. We got some JOLTS data a couple days ago that was mostly in line. But you have 2-month-old data. The Bureau of Labor and Statistics, to me, seems like a mess. There's overstating jobs by 700,000 jobs in a year. That's a big number. So, I mean, I don't know what to believe. ADP and in the BLS a lot of times don't correlate. So it's hard to know what to believe. You're kind of just looking at relative information and seeing, is it tightening up or not? And you got to look at the total employment rate. So I think we're at 3.9 unemployment, 3.9%. And I think when that starts, I think that could cross over to 4% even this month, if not next month. And I think that's going to be the thing that triggers the Fed. Okay. It's going to be the employment side. And I think that's what's going to get them to move. And by the way, it's not going to be as meaningful as, so it's going to be meaningful as that the cutting process has started. But in terms of like actual rates and like what they mean to people, cutting it after, going up 525, 550 basis points and then cutting 25 or 50 this year isn't going to do anything,
Yeah.
but it's psychologically going to help like start the process. So I do
So
think they'll cut
you do.
election
Okay. In
year.
June? In June?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, June or July.
Okay.
And I think you're in election year. And I think they don't want to do it so close to the election that it looks purposeful, but they want to do it early enough. I think Powell does not want the country kind of spinning it into some sort of panic, especially before an election. You've got the former vice chair of, and again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, the former vice chair of the Fed is now the economic advisor to Biden in the second half of his admin.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they're having conversations. Leave it at that. But yeah, it's a relatively, I would say, warm economy. Looks like, but I mean, I don't know, 2% GDP. Are we jumping up and down and like we, won the Super Bowl with a 2 point, it's a 2.1, 2.3. We don't know for GDP. I don't know. I mean, that's not great,
No,
but it's better than nothing.
it's average. But the number one tax that people talk about, other than the ones that governments impose on us, is they call it the oil tax or the gasoline tax, where unlike groceries, where maybe some things are going up and some things are going down, and maybe you don't see it as much, all at once. When the gasoline bill goes up, the gasoline bill goes up. When your fuel bill at home goes up, your fuel bill at home goes up. And those are noticeable immediately. And it's like a tax on your income. It's something you have to pay. And so you end up in trouble right away in terms of what you can spend, and you start stopping spending. And we've got oil going through the roof, gasoline going back. Oil is now Texas Intermediate around 85. You've got Brent almost over 90. Got gasoline back to the prices that it was at the beginning of the year. So all of the effort going down, down, down. Now it's all the way back up. Looked at commodities just a little while ago. Commodities are back to where they were at the beginning of last year after going so deeply. You got gold going off the, I mean, what do you call it? Higher every day. It's starting to look like Bitcoin. Can we say that inflation is solved if we've got all of this happening?
You got to look at inflation X energy, X food. Then you got to look at it all together, because energy hits every other component. But you got to look at like what can the Fed control with interest rates and what can they not control. And that's one thing. And I do think there's a Tesla component here too, because traditionally over the last couple of years, when gasoline prices went up, it kind of felt like there was a spike in interest on Tesla, even the Google searches and everything else. And now what happened? And even then, I think the big auto was playing along because they thought they were going to launch EVs and not knowing what the hell they were doing. And then media was playing along, and media was just talking about big auto and the competition coming. And therefore, so you had this media spend from big auto to media saying that the competition's coming, Tesla's going to get killed. And then these guys went down to the factory to build EVs, and they're like, holy shit, we lose $40,000 to $70,000 a vehicle. We can't do this anymore. Oh, boom, but go back and spin the story up. But people don't want these things. They actually want hybrids. So now you've got hybrids booming at Toyota. You have hybrids booming at Ford. And and it's even surpassing the growth of at least temporarily, the growth of EV. But I think people are going to wake up. I think all those people going to hybrid are just a stepping stone of going to full EV eventually, because they're going to realize that they're promised 30 miles of range on electric, and they realize they're going to get 10 or 15,
right?
And it's not going to be as helpful, because that's what's really going to happen. And they're like, well, I should have just went all EV. So I think there is a component back to the energy conversation that impacts Tesla, but now it looks like it may be pushing people to hybrids, but I think it'll still push people back to EV. So it'll be interesting dynamic. Does oil go to 95, 100?
Good.
And is that people going back and saying, I need a Tesla right away?
Yeah, well, of course, I was in the bicycle industry my whole life. In fact, still am. And we always see it in the bicycle industry. When the price of gasoline goes up, more people walking in the retail stores and buying those bikes. So that's been through my entire career in the bicycle industry.
You would know. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So the market also has been extremely hot. This is the fastest increase in the S&P in history. 30% in 5 months or something like that. I may be getting that statistic off just a tad, but I think that's right. And then we had two bad down days, Monday and Tuesday, and kind of flat today. Is this a breather? Should we be looking at a 5%, timeout? Are we looking at a 10% correction? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think yes, it's a breather. I think it's gonna be short-lived. If you get something, I think is, and not investment advice, obviously, but I think it would be somewhere on the order of, if it were to be extended, be like on the order of 5 to 7%, but I think it gets bought up. And you can't, like, the AI component isn't getting unwound, it's expanding. Remember, TSMC and Nvidia are bringing up all this capacity online. They're doubling capacity year on year. So, and then these big tech companies have made all these margins. They've got all this money to spend: Amazon, Facebook, Tesla, Microsoft, you name it. So that wheel is just going to keep turning on AI. It looks like the economy and people are still going out, they're still spending. Um, so yeah, I think if you could have a little bit of a pullback, and then and maybe this is it. I don't know, or maybe there's a little bit more, but then I think it gets bought up and it keeps going.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see what is actually happening then. Let's look at Tesla. Actually, before we do that, I often forget, but is there anything I've left out? Something that you're passionate about, something that I should have been talking about today in the economy and Tesla? Anything that
No, I mean, I think you're going to get to like what's going on with the price of Tesla, and they just had this P&D report. And what do you think of the price action?
so the price action was really quite interesting. I thought it was one of the most interesting parts of the week.
Yeah.
Was that Tesla, after that amazing, one of the, I would call it the worst numbers I've ever seen in Tesla in the, what is it now, 8 years that I've been following it. And yet yesterday, after a fairly modest sell-off, up $1.75 today in the regular, and it's up $1 more in the after hours. So we're now almost back to 170. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and you have this, you have that. Yeah, so let's talk about Tesla for a bit. So Tesla's down 32, 33% on the year, something on that area, and it's been taking a beating. And it really, people think it's been the whole quarter, but Tesla was, 190 to 200, I think, at the end of February. So not, 5 or 6 weeks ago, it's been really going down. And so there is something to be said that some of this is baked in, but I don't think all of it is. I think the 387 number was a surprise. I think people were expecting, FactSet and,
Right.
And Troy and everybody, like, some number, 420 to 450, right? So, who knows what's happening here? You you'd think that I think there's a little bit of concern of the price action, because yesterday all of the move downward occurred pre-market.
Yeah.
And Xander from our team on Cyber Rules, he called us out too, and he was looking at, like, it all occurred pre-market, and then basically it chopped the rest of the day and ended up a little bit higher than it opened. And there's people stepping in and buying. So everybody's got different time horizons on the stock, and I think there's a lot more confidence that that full self-driving is going to work. And people are not sure of the timetable of when it's going to work, so they're not necessarily betting on this quarter, but what they're betting on is that it's not a $160 stock 2-3 years from now, whatever their time horizon is. So why not pick up some now and pick up some later? Again, none of this is investment advice, but that could be what people are thinking. So yeah, and now it's up in the after hours. It's scooting its way back up to 170. So, and it did this last year, Randy. It spiked up in the beginning part of the year, and then it came down to 155, 160 in May,
Yeah.
and then it doubled May
Yeah.
to July.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Why did the stock double in 2 months, May to July? There wasn't, I know there were supercharger announcements, but there was no financials tied with those announcements. In fact, Elon came out and said, we're giving it away.
Right.
Like, I mean, obviously there's going to be a revenue component, but it's small. And they didn't even have, by the way, they didn't even have the connectors ready. So
Right.
there's nothing there,
Yeah.
but the stock doubled, and they were still consolidating from an EPS perspective. They were going down quarter on quarter EPS. So it's not like analysts were raising their EPS estimates for Tesla. So why did the stock double in 2 months? This is a very difficult stock to predict in time.
I went back in my brain as best as I possibly could because I was kind of new to the Tesla story when FSD was first being talked about. I'd been looking at it for a little while at that point, but pretty much when FSD was first becoming a thing is when I was really getting interested. And I can remember thinking to myself, I would like to have a Tesla so that I could rent it out on as a robotaxi. I was thinking to myself, I would like, as I'm getting older here, to be able to get in my car and go anywhere I want to, even when I'm past the age of when I should be out driving.
Yeah.
I would like my kids, back when I had kids, I would like to be able to send the car to get my kids. Right now I've just sold my car, so I'm down to no cars. My theory was to sell my car a few years ago because I was going to have my wife go on down to her job, and then she could send the car back. I'd have it for the rest of the day. So all those things were on my mind 6 years ago when this was first coming out, and the stock was going crazy. It was also a big, big time of risk on for the market. Of course, everything was up, but I think a lot of what was going on at 410 was FOMO over FSD for personal use, for potential robotaxi use, for the idea of Elon talking about it all the time, that it was going to be the largest gain in value as far as a capital value in history. All of that was on the table, and I think that was a big reason for the move up. And I think that's what you're seeing now. I think that the retail investor, I think the Kathy Woods, she's been buying it hand over fist. Other people like Kathy that are intimate in the story and are big, can really make a serious difference. I think those folks are piling in.
Maybe there could be a component of people there. There's also talk of people trying to like sit back and see like what's a good entry point. They know the company's quote unquote between these two growth waves, and what's a good entry point for AI, what's a good entry point for humanoid. And there's people that are sitting back that they're not even looking at the auto industry, they're looking at the humanoid industry
Yeah.
and saying what's a good time to enter Tesla
Yeah.
because of the reasons we talked about. They can actually build the product. So yeah, there's going to be a component of that. It's hard to say, but it's hard to think that like institutions are piling into Tesla when you have earnings estimates now coming in at, half of where they were last year. It's hard for me to believe that that's happening. So I'm not convinced by any of these price moves one way or another. There's nothing like that's really convincing in any of these moves. The only thing that is convincing is if you look at it on a year to date, the 32% is definitely sending a message of like, hey, you started the year at this level of earnings for 2024 and now you're here, and now I think those revisions are going to come down again.
Okay.
And so the question you have to ask yourself is there a real organized effort of people that are waking up and saying, well, humanoid and FSD, like all this stuff's happening? I haven't seen an organized effort. All you have is this small 0.001% X community where we're talking about it a lot. But I'm not sure that there's an organized effort to invest in humanoid or FSD yet. I'm not saying there should or shouldn't be. I'm just saying I don't know if there's anything organized yet.
Right. Okay. Let's look at the bond market, because that is, of course, what drives the market right now, the bonds and the Fed. As you talked about all the Fed speakers. Oh, my goodness gracious. The 10-year is flat. The 2-year is down 0.1. I'm sorry, just roughly 0.9, but we'll call it 1 basis point. Basically, then you're sitting at 4.345 again on the 10-year. This is obviously should be impacting Tesla also, impacting it not only from the standpoint of interest rates, but also from the standpoint of how it's valued because of the discount rate that you use to make that valuation. So again, Tesla seems to be holding up really well, managing these kinds of headwinds to be able to hold these prices. But the overall economy, if I'm a consumer right now and I'm seeing my interest rates going up and I'm seeing my oil prices going up, my gasoline prices going up, commodities, I'm a manufacturer, I'm seeing my commodity prices going up. Seems like everything's kind of going in the wrong direction right now.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. We got the oil and everybody's saying, oh, but everything's great. And I'm sitting here going, I'm seeing some things that aren't so great. Oil up another 20 cents, 85.63 for West Texas Intermediate, 89.35 for Brent, and natural gas up 0.38. So now at 1848. I don't have a particular price point at which I feel like natural gas breaks up or breaks down. I just haven't paid that much attention to it, but I do know that it hasn't been, I don't think it's been over $2 this year. I don't think so. On the other hand, I do pay attention to the copper, and copper has just been going up all week. It's now at 4.215. Last week it was down under $4. Almost every day it's just up, 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 up. And this is Larry Goldberg's canary in the gold mine, if you will. And
Mine too.
Yours too? Okay.
Yeah.
That if copper is going up, that means commodities are going up. That means that industry in general needs more of these commodities, and that's good for the economy, that the economy is doing well. Is that how you look at it as well?
Yeah, and there's also I think it's I don't know if it's called BCOE, but it's the Bloomberg Commodity Index, and that's another one to look at. It's kind of a basket.
Yes.
And you try to look at it like, where is it relative to its 50-day and 200-day moving average? But all these things look like they're starting to tick over in kind of a bullish state. When I say bullish, meaning it's bullish if you're into those commodities.
Right.
It's not bullish if you're worried about input pricing and so forth. So those are the things to keep in mind. But remember, Tesla purchases a lot of this stuff on contract. So they're at the front of the line, given their volumes and their lead in the industry, they're at the front of the line to renegotiate, and they're at the back of the line to take any price hits. So just remember that it's not a perfect world. Sometimes they do get hit, but in general, they're in a fairly advantaged position, and they don't have spot pricing on a lot of this stuff.
Right. Gold, 2,318, up another $3 in the pre-market. What do you think about gold? I've been talking about it. The only thing that I've been hearing that is particularly interesting is that all the central banks around the world have the lowest stockpile on a percentage basis that they've ever had, and that they're typically at 40% of their assets are in gold, and right now it's closer to 20%. So they're starting to buy, and that's driving a lot of this. But what else have you heard? Have you heard anything? Or
I think it's all those William Devane commercials that are on in the middle of the day during a Family Feud. They're starting to pay off.
That and Costco selling gold.
Costco's selling gold bars.
That's
right. Yeah, I don't have you can tell I don't have a real answer there. So
and the interesting thing is the gold is all-time highs every day, and the dollar is at the top too. So and oil is up. And so normally the dollar goes up, you'd expect those to be going down, but not. So they're all going up. Interesting times. You can't make this stuff up. Bitcoin's sitting flat, up 71 for the day, 66,158. That seems to have decided to take a little breather in the 60, 65, 66 range. Any thoughts on Bitcoin today?
No, I think it does drive some market activity and some pin action back into tech and the Qs. Not a direct connection, but I think when it catches a cold, it's definitely. I mean, there's no coincidence they both kind of caught a cold at the same time. The market and Bitcoin, down 10% from its recent high.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll have to see. Now it's up a little bit today. It was kind of challenged a bit. So we'll have to see. But I think there's something that could be discussed, Randy, like what's going on with these commodities, what's going on with oil. And I mean, we have let in 8+ million people into this country, and those people are consuming resources. So that's not a small number.
Right.
And who knows, maybe it's even higher. There's estimates of it getting, upwards of 10 million at some point. So that could be driving some of the demand on both commodities and services.
Sure, absolutely could. And by the way, I just want to say, I'm 100% if we need 8 to 10 million people in order to run the economy in the United States, let's get 8 to 10 million immigrants to come on in here and help us out. But could we please decide which ones we want to let in and let people come in an orderly fashion? That would be lovely.
We should be able to choose who we want. And then the people that have been waiting,
yes,
in the process, in the queue, should get their just due, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Anyway, all right, we've got the equities. We've got the Dow up 44. Whoops, wait a minute. My thing just changed. I think it wasn't the stock market. It was just my app. So we've got the Dow up 43 or 0.11%, S&P up 11 or 0.21%, and the NASDAQ up 69 or 0.38%. So if the pre-market is any judge, we might have a little bit of bargain hunting tomorrow going on in the equities.
Yeah.
And
it looks like we could get a little, could have a decent day tomorrow. So we'll see. It's, it's early, it's pre-market, so we'll see.
And Tesla's just going up and up and up in the after hours, now at $1.42 in the after hours. So look at that.
They must be catching this live stream, Randy. I don't know what else to tell you.
They must be listening. All right. Well, that's, I think, all we've got today. Earlier today, we did have Scott Walter on. I don't know if you took a look at that one, but if you didn't, it was a very, that was a good one. But I also want to let everybody know that I'll put a card up for them right there for them to go back and take a look at that. Listen, it is always great, Jeff, to have you on. I appreciate that different set of understandings and skill sets that you bring to the channel. And until next Wednesday, then, thank you so much for coming on. And to all
thank you, Randy.
out there, it's been great talking to you.